I am thrilled to be with you. We are at capacity crowd. There's about 500 people here, so we're thrilled by that. We're live on WTNH Facebook, so be on your best behavior. And we've got timers in front, so thank you for doing this. We're going to keep our candidates, we're sticklers about time. So if you guys can hear me back there, just be prepared, okay? Because I'm a grandmother now, so I can, do that. So I want to introduce the two folks that are going to be asking questions. Come on out, George Colley and Vinnie Penn.
Thank you.
So we're going to start questioning now, and I'm going to start with Vinnie Penn. Vinnie, your first question.
Okay, just want to get out of the way really quickly that the majority, I'll only have one. I solicited questions on my radio show, so the remainder of my questions will be Frank, Ansonia, et cetera, et cetera. They'll be very short, very succinct, and I think that's a good way to go about things. My only question, and forgive the long setup, is today is my daughter's 15th birthday. She's having cake right now, but I chose to do this because, as I mentioned, I attended Notre Dame, and in 1983, the only security that Notre Dame High School had was Brother Benjamin. And in light of what happened last week, and in light of the fact that this is Connecticut, post-Sandy Hook, where we've done absolutely zero since what took place in Sandy Hook, what are all of your solutions as far as school security and our kids and their 15th birthdays? And I'd like to go left to right.
Thank you, Vinnie. I appreciate that question. The safety and security of all the people of the state of Connecticut is the most solemn obligation of the next governor, but most especially about our kids, because that's the next generation of people that we hope to pass this state on to. And you talked about Sandy Hook, and we saw what happened in Florida this past week. Here's what it comes down to, folks. If we're going to make schools safe, we have to have a comprehensive approach that focuses on many different factors. A deadly weapon is made deadly by a deadly person. And we have not invested enough funding in mental health and mental wellness in this state. That was one of my biggest problems with SB 1160. It didn't make the needed investments in mental health, and it certainly didn't make the needed investments in school security. When I led Trumbull for 8 years, we didn't have school resource officers when I was elected. When I left office, we had them not only in our high school, but also our middle school, because I want our law enforcement to be able to work with our educators to identify potential problems or threats before they materialize and to head them off. We have got to invest in school security. We have to invest in mental health. Law enforcement and educators need to work hand in hand in heading off problems before they materialize. We have to deal with an opioid epidemic in this state that compromises the safety of kids here in the state of Connecticut. So, Vinnie, to answer your question, we passed very strict gun control in 2012 after Sandy Hook. Before that, we had some of the most strict gun control laws in the country. It can't just be a conversation about gun control. We have to talk about school safety, school security, security enhancements, working with educators and law enforcement, investing in mental health, and making sure law enforcement has the resources they require.
Mr. Lumaj, you want to take that?
Well, thank you. My heart goes to the victims and the families in Florida, but we have to understand one thing, that we protect the president with guns. We protect the vice president with guns. We protect the congressman, congresswoman with guns. We protect the senators with guns. You go to the state offices, they are protected with guns. You go to banks, they are protected with guns. You go to police stations, they are protected with guns. Yet the most precious thing that we have in our lives, our children, are not protected. As a society, we have failed them. So if I were your governor, there would be an executive order that every school in our state will provide security, armed security for our children. And you can bet on that. We have retired police officers and military people in our state who have served us well, who have protected you and I, and we can trust them to protect our children. So I would issue an executive order that our children are going to be protected, and you can count on me.
Thank you so much. Mr. Obsitnik.
Like you, Vinny, and many in this room, I'm a parent first, and I have 2 daughters that go to school every day, and I hope and pray they come home safely. And we've watched this heinous act in Parkland and others around the country. We have a crisis. Our kids are being killed in many instances. Look, our elected officials need to act. And I agree with what Tim said. We need a comprehensive approach to this. There's not going to be one thing that solves these problems. Why aren't elected officials coming together around common sense thing around background checks? Why aren't we doing more to protect our schools? Why aren't they working more closely with with the law enforcement to close some of these data gaps we've had and share information to get ahead of the problem before it happens? There are many things that need to be looked at on that. So this is a heinous act. And I think you all believe too, there's time for our elected officials in Washington and here to step forward and address this crisis in a competent way that addresses this problem so our kids come home from school tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Srinivasan.
Our children, the most precious things any one of us can have. You talked about your 15th birthday for your daughter. My daughter lives 3 houses away from me, and she has 3 little girls. And for all of us, each and every one, our prayer every morning is when those kids get on the school bus, they come home safely. Public safety is one of the priorities of the state government. And as a governor, as your governor, I will look into 3 things that are critical. Number 1, school security. It has to be provided. It was provided in the bill that was passed in 2013. But what happened? It was not funded. It was an empty promise made, and that is unacceptable, will not happen as your next governor. We will have to look seriously at mental health. That's what triggers. That's where all these massacres happen. So for us to look at early signals and begin there is what I would propose, not just propose. Proposal is easy. Talk is easy. You've got to walk that talk and make sure that you provide the funding. And the third important factor is to get families involved. Our society has to come together in one voice, parents, teachers, schools, and the legislators, to make sure that we have a safe environment day in and day out. And when your child gets on their bus to school, you do not need to worry, you should not worry whether the child is going to be coming back home. Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
I got married at 19, and so my kids are grown. But I have 2 children that are 2 grandchildren that are in high school, and 1 grandchild who's in middle school. My wife is also an elementary school teacher. She was teaching on the tragic day of Sandy Hook in Fairfield schools. So this is something that I can very much relate to. Clearly, school security is a priority. Clearly, we need to do something with regard to mental health. Connecticut has some of the toughest gun laws in the United States. But I also think that while protecting the First Amendment or the Second Amendment rights of our citizens and the Constitution of the state of Connecticut, more has to be done with regard to background checks. We clearly have some flaws in the background check system. We have to look at where you have devices that will convert a legal weapon into an illegal weapon. And so, yes, school security, yes, mental health, protect our constitutional rights, but there are some issues that we have to focus on further than we have already. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boughton.
As someone who taught high school for 14 years at Danbury High School, I'm acutely aware of the challenges of being able to provide security for a building that houses over 3,000 students now. That's a difficult and challenging problem. So we do have to have a comprehensive approach. And really it comes down to 3 things that we've got to do to ensure the safety and security of our students. First thing is we've got to break down silos. We've got to get agencies talking to each other. Police departments got to talk to our educators. Educators got to talk to our youth agencies in each community. We've got to identify kids that are engaged in risky behavior and have an early intervention on those children to make sure that they don't carry things out to the extreme. So it's really important because right now we're running a bifurcated or divided system where people can't talk back and forth by law in some cases, by statute, and by federal law. Second, we have to invest in mental health. You've heard that already. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the state government has slowly withdrawn mental health funding to, again, identify young people that are engaged in risky behavior. And finally, the third thing, something that I proposed at the legislature in 2013, was that we've got to have a common platform for training our security guards. Most schools in Connecticut now have some form of security. In Danbury, we call them safety advocates, and they spend their whole time basically concerned about the safety of the building. The problem is the training changes and varies from community to community. And so that issue means that when you have a response like we had at Sandy Hook, where it was a regional response, led of course by the Newtown PD, but other police departments show up, we've got to know that that person in the building who is dealing with the situation has been trained on the same platform. That requires an investment. But I don't think that we can really play games with the investment in our children. That's the most important thing, important function government can do, and it's something that we need to look at very carefully.
Thank you so much. Mr. Handler.
I appreciate this is the first question of the night. It's probably one of the most important topics we can talk about. Many of you know me as the Chief Financial Officer of the City of Stamford. What you may not know is I've spent over 25 years in public safety, and I currently serve as the Emergency Management Director for the town of New Canaan, where my wife Sarah and our 4 daughters live. So I've got the responsibility, and I serve on a team of administrators and law enforcement and professionals who are solely responsible for the safety of over 4,200 students in our schools. And it's a situation that we all take extremely seriously. I want to talk to you a little bit about what we go through on a regular basis. The goal here is to balance safety and security with the nurturing environment of an educational school. It's very difficult. If we wanted to, we could solve this problem by making every school a fortress. It's not that difficult. The problem is we have to preserve the educational environment where kids can thrive. A couple things we've got to talk about. We are in financial crisis as a state, and I am a chief financial officer. So most of what you hear me talk about is financial problems. But here's the sad reality. You cannot do good things when you're in crisis. Yesterday, I called on the governor to make funding available for every school in the state of Connecticut that wishes to have a school resource officer available. We can no longer have, and this is not the solution we want. No one wants to have law enforcement in their schools, but it's a sad reality of today's times. But we cannot allow a financial decision to be the only gatekeeper between having a law enforcement officer in our schools versus not. We have got to find the money, and it's hard to say we have to spend more money, but the reality is this is too precious. Our kids are too precious not to spend the money to provide a law enforcement officer who can be in the fabric of the community of our schools to work, to understand what the challenges are with our students, and to be a different lens on the problems that administrators are presented with. Also, mental health issues. Again, when you're in crisis, you cannot do good things. Just like the governor is forcing Medicaid residents out of nursing homes because it's cheaper to care for them at home, we have closed our inpatient facilities for mental health. And the byproduct of that is we have no place to treat our mentally ill patients. So we've got to find a way to peel money off of our tight budget already to put it where it matters the most. And there's no greater cause than protecting our young people in our state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Loretti.
As the chief elected official of the city, one of your top priorities is public safety, which is all-encompassing. The issue of school safety has become one of a national problem that has evolved over the last several years. I would recall that many years ago when I was teaching and coaching basketball in Bridgeport, that I was a personal witness to 3 shootings. And I have understood how this problem has evolved over the course of time. And so when you come from a perspective of dealing with the public, you understand how many things have changed within our society that affect the way we think, the way we live, and the way we present ourselves. And it has now come home to roost that when parents are not diligent in parenting and you release the disciplines within society, you pay a price for that. Finance is certainly a part of it, but it's an all-encompassing equation. You know, since Sandy Hook, there are many schools across our state that have taken the opportunity
to do entry door fortification, tempered glass in the schools that are bulletproof. We've increased our security in terms of personnel. We have police officers in our schools, and now we have surveillance. And so with all that, even when that falls short, the public has a responsibility to step up to the plate as well. The slogan is, when you see something, say something. Couldn't be truer in this day and age than it is now. And so if people think that the government has the cure-all for all of these things, I would tell you to take a closer look, that it's going to require leadership, and yes, government has a significant role, but we live in a very open and vulnerable society, and has had a great impact on all of us. So, you know, yes, money is part of the equation, and there are many municipalities within the state that have the ability to increase their securities, and they have. And so the ones that haven't need our priorities. And as governor, I would advocate a more uniform type of security system that could be employed across the state, particularly in our bigger schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Gentlemen, thank you for your thoughts on that very important topic. Mr. Colley, your question.
Because I know time is precious. So you guys all have these things, right? So a yes-no question. Raise it if it's yes. And you can all do it at the same time. Would you maintain the current gun laws in the state that were voted, that were put in place post-Newtown? Would you strengthen those gun laws? Would you weaken them? Okay. Other topic, along the same lines, background checks. And in one moment,
you want to speak to that, or
would you like to speak to that, Mr. Walker?
I'm maybe going to ask it now because
okay.
That's too comprehensive. I already said we need to do more on background checks.
Okay. And I guess we were going to say that for everybody. Background checks. Who goes along with President Trump and believes that background checks need to be looked at and need to be and potentially need to be strengthened? Okay. And who thinks that they should be weakened? Okay. We'll save you all the time. We'll kind of see where you're at there. So here's my next question. Many people in the audience and many people here on stage may have chanted "drain the swamp" last year. And I think that draining the swamp can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I asked somebody about it today, and they said it's the idea of lobbyists and big government and industries working together to work over the little guy, to work over the middle class. And you can say whether or not you agree with that. So my question is, as governor, what do you consider to be Connecticut swamp, and how would you drain it?
Who wants raise your lollipops, as I call them? They're lollipops. Mr. So who wants to take that first? Mr. Lumaj?
Mr. Lumaj, all you.
Thank you. What I consider to be the swamp is the government. It's Hartford itself. My plan calls for a cut of all state agencies by 14%, which will save you and I $1.3 billion right away. Every agency that would pass a regulation should repeal 4. Mandates, which are driving business and people out of state, are going to be reversed. Crony capitalism, which is a coordination or a combination of working out the state and certain major corporations, is not going to be tolerated in our state any longer. So that you and I, ordinary folks like you and I, are going to have the chance to live the American dream. And when we talk about the swamp, we're talking about the taxation. We're taxing people to death. My plan calls for anyone who makes less than $100,000 a year shouldn't pay any state income tax at all. Lower the corporate taxes. Lower the sales taxes. Refuse any taxes that is being introduced right now in Hartford or any fees. That is all just redistribution of property. That is not capitalism. So what we're going to promote over here is pure capitalism and try to defeat statism, which is the swamp. And I would be doing that.
Mr. Herbst.
And then we'll go down, going this way for those who want to answer it, or if they don't want to answer it, they can pass on to the next.
So do you want to go to Mr. Herbst first?
So we'll actually go to Mr. Obsitnik, and Mr. Herbst will be first.
All right.
Thank you for the question. As a naval veteran, I have low tolerance for corruption. As a CEO of several high-tech companies, I wasn't successful in my business if there was any corruption. And we've called it out with customers, government customers along the way, because that's just how I live my life. So what is the swamp? The swamp is when we've had governors of Connecticut for 30 years give collective bargaining agreements to a self-interest which has led us to this $100 billion of deficits that debt that we're dealing with, unfunded liabilities. The swamp is also when it cost us $500,000 to build a mile of road in Connecticut when the national average is $150,000. We can keep going on. That's the top two. I can give you the top 40 if you like.
No, as long as you want, sir.
So, look, I think when you talk about rooting out the swamp, it comes down to what's your vision for the state? And how do you unify people around a bigger vision? My vision is the reality around that we've created 6,000 jobs in Connecticut since 1989. 6,000 jobs. That's 200 a year. Texas creates 200,000 jobs a year. So I believe we have to have a vision about what is possible with all of our underutilized assets as a state, and someone who actually has built jobs and manufactured things with their hands, not just manage money, either collecting your taxes or investing your money. And that's the reality we need, is an outside business person who knows how the outside world competes, what it means to be efficient, bring those efficiencies to our state so you can put more money in your pocket so you can go out and live the dream that you want for yourself and your family. Thank you very much.
George, before Mr. Herbst answers this, can you repeat the question again, just so people remember?
And we're going to continue to go from left to right, right? So Tim will be last here. If we.
Oh, okay, so repeat the question, please.
The question would be, what do you consider to be Connecticut's swamp, and how would you drain it?
Anybody down here? Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. When I think of our state and the swamp, the very first thing that comes to mind is the inefficiencies in our state government. That is what I want to drain on day one when I take office. What do I mean by that? Every agency, every state agency will be required to come up with a budget, zero-based budgeting. That is how I would drain the swamp. Every agency chief will be given a folder, will be given a pad and a pen, and work up your budget bottom up, not top to bottom. So we know where the spending is, and then, as your governor, will be able to control the spending, which is the first swamp I would drain. The second one is going to be the pension liabilities. We have to drain that swamp. Without that, there is no future for the state, and we all want a future for our children and our grandchildren. And for that, pension will be based only on base pay. Pension will not include overtime, mandated overtime. Pension will be based, the cost of living index, adjusted to inflation, not an artificial number of 2 to 8%. And the third thing I would address in draining the swamp as far as pension is concerned is make sure the loopholes that we currently have are drained as well. And the third area in the swamp I would look at is the regulations, the mandates that we have, the unpredictability that businesses face. I'm a small business owner myself, having a small medical practice. What I don't want is to be told this is a new rule, a new regulation, a new mandate. That will be drained as well. That is my vision, to drain the swamp in our state. Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
There are several factors that cause this question to be relevant. First, the official name of our state is the Constitution State, even though we don't always follow our Constitution. And secondly, our unofficial name is Corrupticut. So let me tell you what we need to do. Career politicians, public sector labor union leaders, and the bureaucracy. I believe in term limits for governor, 8 years, 12-year term limits for state legislators. I believe that we need to toughen the conflict of interest rules so that paid public sector union leaders cannot be Speaker of the House of Representatives. I believe that we need to have the right to recall a chief executive officer if they blatantly lie to us and then go back on their promise on a significant issue. I believe in certain initiative and referendum rights. I also believe in right-sizing the bureaucracy. I had the honor and privilege of being the Comptroller General of the United States for 10 years. There's only been 8 in the history of this country. That means Auditor General, Chief Performance and Accountability Officer. I've done this. I made my agency, which is very large and covers the entire federal government, 13% smaller, eliminated 1/3 of its offices, got rid of 60% of the organization units, eliminated a layer of management, did public-private partnerships, leveraged technology, improved productivity, 90%, improved the return on investment for the American taxpayer over double, and saved the American taxpayers $380 billion in 10 years. I've done it. I can do it here. Let's get it done.
Mr. Boughton.
Drain the swamp. I'll tell you how we drain the swamp. We end 40 years of Democratic control in the state legislature. That's how we drain the swamp. We get 4 more state representatives elected, we can run the House of Representatives. We get 1 senator to flip over, we can run the state Senate. That's how we drain the swamp. We've tried it their way for the last 35 years. And what has it gotten us? This isn't the Connecticut I remember, and I know it's not the Connecticut that you remember. It's gotten us an unmitigated disaster. You all know where the swamp is. It lies with a party that allows a convicted felon to run for governor. How absurd is that? And nobody says anything about it. Even the press. If that were a Republican, you'd be excoriated. So the fact of the matter is, to drain this swamp, we got to win elections. And that's what I'm fixing to do in November. Be your next governor.
Mr. Handler.
It's fun. Drain the swamp. It's kind of an interesting thing to say, but the reality is it's not going to solve our problems in our state. We've got to get past the one-liners. We've got to look past the things that feel great to say and the bumper stickers. Here's the sad reality. We've got a very unsexy problem we've got to solve. No one wants to put a bumper sticker on the back of their car that says, we fixed the balance sheet of Connecticut. But the reality is, it's not about individuals. It's not about people running for governor as a Democrat. That sounds great to say. The reality is, we've got a $100 billion problem we've got to fix. And how do we go about fixing it? The issue is these long-term unfunded liabilities. It's not that they're bad people. Our employees have all the benefits known to mankind that none of you in the real world have. And how do we go about fixing that? I'd prefer to focus more on that question than on draining the swamp. We've got a hole, not a swamp. Thank you.
Mr. Loretti.
It is true that the term drain the collective swamp is very catchy today. But the swamp in Connecticut is the one-party rule that has taken us down a financial path that has jeopardized all of our futures, whether you're a business owner, a property owner, or just a resident trying to get a job. And so for me, when people stand up here and talk about career politicians, I guess after 14 terms, maybe I could be termed a career politician, but I think that all of you, once you understood what my financial record was, would love to have me for life. Because in my 26 years, if you look at our tax rate, 19 times we have either left it alone or lowered it. That has created a lot of economic prosperity in the city that I run. That has helped me change the face of the city in Fairfield County that is prospering where others are not. So the collective swamp in Connecticut is the one-party rule that needs to change. It's all about winning elections. I've won 14 of them in a very different electorate over the course of the last quarter of a century. That's how it happens.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Herbst.
What constitutes the swamp? I'll tell you what constitutes the swamp. When legislators are allowed to take their mileage reimbursement and use it to pad their pensions. I'll tell you what constitutes the swamp. What constitutes the swamp is that we have a $21 billion unfunded health care liability in this state, and there are retired members of the legislature, current members of the legislature, that are receiving better health care than what members of Congress receive. I'll tell you what the swamp is. The swamp is you're paying the highest utility costs of any state in the nation because the utility companies, through their big donations and their cozy relationships, curry favor with the legislature, and that's why you have high utility rates. I'll tell you what the swamp is. The swamp is when inappropriate conduct at the legislature is brushed under the carpet so we don't rock the boat. I will tell you what the swamp is. At the University of Connecticut, with a president who gives out 22% pay increases at a time we're cutting funding for local towns, cities, and schools. A $5 million payout in severance for former football coaches. I'll tell you what the swamp is. When the governor of the state of Connecticut nominates his best friend and political advisor to be the Chief Justice of the Connecticut State Supreme Court with limited judicial experience. So here's how we fix it. Leaders need to lead by example. All the things that you just mentioned, I just mentioned, I'm the only person on this stage that has publicly called these things out over the course of the last year. And I'm the only person on this stage that has taken a lead by example pledge. If I am elected governor of the state of Connecticut, I'm going to refuse a pension from the state, and I'm going to insist that all of my department heads do the same. I am the only candidate running for governor who has pledged not to accept donations from lobbyists. Because you know what? When I get there on day one, I don't want them lined up outside of my office. I am the only candidate in this race that has called out Susan Herbst and has called out the nomination of Andrew McDonald. Leaders need to lead by example. And when I am your governor, I will be beholden to no one but the people of the state of Connecticut.
Vinny, I'm going to have you have another question. What's your next question?
Yes, Jason from Waterbury writes, it is believed that in order for the Republicans to win in November, they must go into the election united against the Democrat candidate. Given this thought process, whose intention is it to pursue a primary regardless of the outcome of the convention? Raising of the hands if possible.
I think I saw Mr. Lumaj first. Just raise your lollipop, if you will. Go ahead. Okay. Mr. Lumaj, I saw your hand first.
Yep, absolutely. And second question being from a Themis in Derby, common name. Considering the opioid epidemic, do you all believe that police officers should be trained and provided Narcan, and each acting sitting mayor, are your police officers trained and do they provide Narcan?
Yes.
And we'll do one more yes or no over here. You had mentioned utility company increases. It's something we've been working on the last week. Who here believes that the legislature, who here supports Eversource increasing the increase in fees that they're looking to have a vote for? Who doesn't, and who does support, who was against it? Okay. Would you like to say something on that?
Comment? Yeah.
Sure.
My wife and I chose Connecticut 8 years ago, and we moved here from Mount Vernon, Virginia. And our electric bill is double what it is in Northern Virginia. It is an outrage. There's some kind of scam going on, and if I'm your next governor, we're gonna get to the bottom of it and change this. You're not going to get significant manufacturing in this state unless we do something about a number of things, including our electric rates. It's critically important.
Mr. Obsitnik.
It's a great question. I'm a manufacturer. We manufacture smart antennas for AT&T and Verizon. And I'll tell you a story about a business in Bridgeport. They employ 500 people in Bridgeport, and they customize, mugs, tchotchke stuff with labels on it. And I met this gentleman who owns the business a few years ago. And he came to me, and he said, I'm thinking about leaving Connecticut. So he did a study about it. And he called me back up. He said he wanted to share the study with me. The first line item in there, if he moved to Georgia, he would save $500,000 a year in electricity cost alone. Halving his electricity cost. That's what businesses need, is a whole ecosystem that helps them be competitive in this world that they're in. The one thing keeping him here right now is his workforce. But year after year, he keeps saying that the workforce in the South is catching up to us. So we have time to look at our resources here. 1/3 of the U.S. economy is within 500 miles of us. 40 million consumers are in a 200-mile radius. We live along this I-95, 91, 84 corridor with access to major airports and seaports across the state. We have 42 colleges, ladies and gentlemen, 42. And 1 out of every 2 kids who graduates will have to leave the state to find a job. So electricity rates is one thing, but you all deserve a governor who knows how the outside world competes, so we can build an ecosystem so we can turn the moving vans around, keep that business in Bridgeport with 500 jobs, and do much better than what we've done for the last 30 years. Thank you.
Anybody else want to answer this question? Mr. Srinivasan.
Thank you. I would invest in renewable energy. That's where the future is. That's where we need to pay attention on. Community solar farms, that's picking up. And that way, through solar energy, through renewable energy, not only do we have clean air, which is important, but equally important, we're going to have electricity costs significantly reduced. That is my plan. Thank you.
Anybody else on the power question? All right, gentlemen, next question.
Mike from New Haven wonders, the recently passed CBAC deal, which only passed by the Lieutenant Governor's tie-breaking vote, binds the hands of the next 2 gubernatorial terms, which is interesting with the 8-year term limit idea, which I like, and the next 5 legislatures. How do you each navigate that obstacle?
Go ahead.
So the next would be Mr. Obsitnik if he wants. If you want to pass, then you can go on.
No, it's fine. The question is how to deal with the CBAC agreement that we, quote unquote, have been bound to by Governor Malloy. Look, this is a problem that I've dealt with in business before. When you turn around a business, you sit down, you look at the contracts you have, and you sit down with people, first of all, and you try to be reasonable on why it's in their interest to make their benefits stable. Because this is about the stability of pensioners who accepted something. It was not their fault, but it's the career politician who put it in place and didn't pay for it. So I would first look to talk to people about it, and if they aren't willing to engage in a thoughtful dialogue and discussion, then you have to use every recourse possible. And it will be working with the legislature to open up that contract, and if need be, pulling out the sovereign immunity clause in our Constitution so that we can reorganize our way out of this debt that we've taken on that unfortunately pensioners will not be able to count on, and also that you taxpayers shouldn't bear the burden of. That's how I would address it. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Anybody else on this question? Mr. Srinivasan.
Thank you. I would definitely reopen the contracts, renegotiate, and get people at the table. That is the way you would have to move forward. Has it been done before? Of course it has. Look at the model in Rhode Island. There you have a Democratic governor. Look at Wisconsin. You have a Republican governor. So this is not a challenge that the state, the union has not seen before. It can be done. It will be done. As your next governor, you've got to have the vision, and you've got to be bold enough to ensure that everybody is at the table and the negotiations will start. Thank you.
Anybody else on this question? Go ahead.
I am uniquely qualified to solve this problem. Let me give you some facts. We have over $70 billion in unfunded pension and retiree health care obligations at the state level. The pensions are funded 25 cents on the dollar based on reasonable assumptions. Retiree health care 1 to 2 cents on the dollar. The benefits are the most lucrative of any state in the nation and much more generous than a Fortune 100 company. Career politicians and public sector labor union leaders have conspired for years to promise the sun, the moon, and the stars that we cannot afford, that we cannot sustain, and that have not been funded. If we don't solve this ticking time bomb, it means higher taxes, less investments in infrastructure, less investment in schools, and a shredding of the social safety net over time. It is the single thing you have to do. Now, how do you do it? You're not going to negotiate this. Cut me a break. That's naive. The state is a sovereign entity. And a federal court said 2 weeks ago in Rhode Island something I've been saying for years, that the U.S. Constitution is not relevant to this. The states are sovereign entities. This is the state contract. We will override the CBAC agreement when we have a governor and the legislature that will agree to do it. We will limit the scope of bargaining so that we do not include pensions and retiree health care in the future so we don't get in this situation again. We will restructure these benefits so they're as good as a Fortune 100 company, that we can afford it, that we can sustain it, and we will make a firm commitment to fund. And let me tell you now, if this is not done, pack your bags. Get ready to move. It's that serious. I'm uniquely qualified. I've run 2 of the 3 federal agencies that deal with pensions and health care, and I've advised other governors on how to get this done. Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen, we have about 10 minutes left before our break. Mr. Boughton, you want to take this question? And watch your time here. Mr. Boughton, then Mr. Lumaj, Loretti. Okay, go ahead.
As I started out the discussion a little bit earlier tonight, this is our moment. This is really the Connecticut moment. And if we don't make changes to the CBAC agreement, we're not going to be able to put a state trooper on the road anywhere in Connecticut. That's just a fact. So by hook or by crook, we're going to have to come up with a way to be able to modify those agreements. Does it mean legal action? It might. Does it mean putting some of the rights and benefits of employment in statute versus being negotiated items? It might. Does it mean requiring the legislature to actually vote on these contracts? It's a good start. But we need to be able to handle the ongoing unfunded liability. Now, in Danbury, we've already done that. We've already made the changes. We have 6 collective bargaining units. And sometimes we've had to go the legal route. And we won. Because we made the argument that this is just an unsustainable path for our residents. And we can do the same thing at the state. We've been beneficial that you can't count overtime in our retirement calculations, that your pension for those on a defined benefit program only have base salary. Everybody else, we moved to a defined contribution program, a 401k style program. And we've been able to bend the cost curve and lower our long-term liability. In addition to that, we've gone through a buyout program. We're now buying out people of their pensions. It's the greatest thing ever. I go right up to people and I go, hey, listen, Joey, your pension's worth $500,000. How about we give you a check for $450 right now and you waive all your rights to future pension payments? And people jump on it all the time and they can do whatever they want with that money. They can go to Vegas and have a great time. They can take it pre-tax. They can move around. But the point is that we've lowered and bent the cost curve. Those are kind of initiatives and strategic things that we need to do to be able to pull our way out of this. But the first thing we need to do is to change the working conditions for new employees in the state. It's absurd that we can't make those changes even for somebody who's not yet a state employee.
Mr. Lumaj.
I think it's working. CBAC is a contract, and we cannot breach it. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not telling you the truth. It was negotiated by elected officials. It was negotiated by career politicians, and we got what we got. The only way for us to bring the unions back to the table is by introducing legislation that our state will become a right-to-work state. What we have, thank you, what we have right now, the unions have become the 4th branch of our government. And without the unions, none of the politicians in Hartford could get elected or re-elected. They are in bed together. They are working against you and I. Right now you have over 1,000 retirees in our state who are making over $100,000 a year in retirement. How did they get that? You have judges who served us for 2 years, counted the overtime towards their pension retirement, and they are making a killing. Is the private sector doing the same thing? Absolutely not. So what we have to do, get a governor elected to Hartford, a complete outsider who is not owned by anyone and doesn't owe anyone anything but the taxpayers. I'm one of those guys. I'm not owned by anyone. Nobody owes me anything. The only people that I would be indebted to, it is the voters, whether they are Democrats, Republicans, or unaffiliated. You need someone to go to Hartford to clean that swamp that we were just talking about. A politician is not going to do that. They are too comfortable to disturb their own selves. They're not going to do that. Get someone with the character and the fortitude who is willing to go to Hartford and dismantle it. The mentality in Hartford has to be dismantled for the sake and the future of our children and grandchildren. Do not expect career politicians to do this. Do not expect the failed liberal policies that we have implemented in Hartford for the past 20 years to be reversed by the people who have been there for 10, 15, 20 years. Do not expect the people who have been in office for 20 years and 30 years to change their attitude and behavior now. They are so used to it that they are just telling you what they want to hear. Get someone like Trump, who is going to Washington and making the changes that you and I need. Get the same guy or girl to Hartford, who is going to make those changes, who is going to fight for you, and if you give me a chance, I'm going to be that guy. I'm a fearless conservative, and I'm going to fight for your principles. I'm going to fight for a limited government so that you and I can reclaim again the freedom and liberty that our Constitution guarantees us, not the unions, not the politicians. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Handler.
So this is the issue we all came to talk about tonight. We've got a couple issues that are far more important. Pensions and retiree health care, the math has been laid out for you a moment ago by the other candidates. Now we know what the issue is. Let's talk about how we solve it. First of all, since this is the biggest issue we face, all options must be left on the table. But let's talk about the legal challenge for a second. We're still dealing with the fallout from the roll-in litigation. Our problem is we don't have 10, 15 years to resolve this in the court system. Let's talk about the legislative issue. That's a great solution. But what happens if we don't take the House and the Senate? Do we go forward for 1 year and then backwards the next year, hoping we win at the next election? We've got to solve this problem now. The only way we're going to solve this is to negotiate the change. And here's how we have to do it. We have to take all of our active employees and convert all their pensions into 401A or 401K style defined contribution plans. Here's the reality. There is no plan B. We don't have the luxury of tinkering around the edges like Rhode Island did. We can't just push back the retirement age or remove the cost of living adjustments. We've got to make wholesale change now because that $70 billion crisis is around the corner. It will crowd out everything else we want to do as a state. Here's the catch. It's better for our employees. I firmly believe that our employees are far better off with a 100% funded defined contribution plan that's portable, tax-deferred, and fully funded. It's far better than a 24 or 25% funded pension. There's a myth that's being perpetuated out there that Dan Malloy and the Democrats are pro-labor. Let me tell you something. They're pro-Democrats. They're not pro-labor. This is not someone's friend when you give a benefit you have no intention of ever funding. Retiree health care is number 2. We've got to get out of the healthcare business the way we know it. When I got to Stanford in 2012, I was asked to come fix a city that was in financial crisis. I was hired by a Republican and stayed on with a Democrat. I stayed on because this is the number one issue we faced. Our 10 labor contracts where employees had all the benefits and none of the benefits were funded. We made those changes through negotiations, not by being the loudest person in the room or yelling and screaming, not by going to arbitration, by sitting down and talking about what the word unsustainable means to employees and their families. Once you do that, you have the ability to actually stand and reason and make changes to make our employee benefits in the public sector look more like those in the private sector. And then in the city of Stanford, we fully funded them. And today, the city of Stanford is a AAA city that has all of its negotiated contracts where the benefits are fully funded in long-term arc for pension and retiree health care are met. We can fix this in our state, but we've got to do it in a negotiation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Handler. Let the record show for Mr. Loretti it should be 3 minutes. Mr. Mullins should be 3 minutes. Go ahead.
There are many things that were said here with respect to the CBAC agreement that I agree with. So for the sake of not being redundant, I would say that, you know, I represent a public entity whose pensions are 100% funded. And I deal with unions on a regular basis. And in my 26 years, I've never been to binding arbitration because I have a relationship with the people that work for us. And when you promise something, you have to deliver. And as was already said here, the things that were promised in Connecticut are unsustainable. We all know that. They know that. So if people think that they're just going to come in and blow this thing up, I would respectfully disagree with that. The next governor has to have a working relationship with the legislature. I said a while ago that the one-party rule in this state has devastated our finances. This is yet another example of that. So when we elect a Republican governor and a Republican legislature, we'll be able to accomplish many things. Because you see, over my tenure, I've watched 4 different governors, 4 very different personalities, 4 very different ideologies, all get the same result. More regulation, more spending, and consequently more taxing. And that all has to be undone. And you need the legislature to do that, because many of these things are encoded in statute. And so when you talk from a point of experience and you understand how this problem has evolved over the course of time, like many problems that we'll talk about today, you understand how to get them fixed. And in Connecticut, it's a very intertwined legislature that has just driven the cost of living and doing business in the state that has made us unaffordable. Connecticut is even unaffordable for the people that can afford to be here, with a thing called the estate tax. And that means that if you've attained some level of wealth all your life and you've spent all your life paying taxes, that when you pass on, you're going to pay one more time. Well, those people aren't buying it, so they're leaving. We need to keep our wealth in the state. We need to make Connecticut affordable. There are many ways to do that. When you do that, we'll be more competitive with our competitors, who are New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Massachusetts. And when you do that, we will grow our tax base. We will keep our wealth here. We will keep our taxpayers here. We'll have more people in the equation, and we'll reduce our spending.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, go ahead. Do you want to answer this question? Our time is short. We're going to take a break. I'm going to give you...
I'm going to ask one more question probably, Ann,
but
let them finish
actually,
up
we
time.
need to take a break, so
Okay.
I'm going to charge the two of you. Can you ask this panel, because one of our candidates only has 5 seconds left.
Yep.
Can you ask them an up or down question quickly?
We can do that, I guess, with Mr. Herbst and Obsitnik if they want to answer this question, and then we can get the yes or no, because they still have...
You got a short amount of time. Go ahead.
Yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can't underscore this point more so than I'm about to right now. The situation that the state of Connecticut is facing in 2018 is worse than what Wisconsin faced in 2010. That's a fact. We have a state with 3.5 million people with a projected $4.6 billion budget deficit. On a per capita basis, far worse. I agree with many of the things that have been said with respect to the CBAC agreement, but here's what this election comes down to. And as Republicans, this is the decision you are going to have to make. This is a question of trust. Who can you trust to have the stamina, to have the spine, to have the backbone, to have the courage to do what needs to be done and tell it like it is? We cannot have a governor that tries to be on both sides of every issue. We cannot have a governor that tells people what they want to hear in the name of winning an election. We need to elect a governor that's going to be honest in telling you what you need to hear, and who is not going to flinch, who is not going to falter, and who is not going to waver in doing what needs to be done to fix our state. I inherited a pension fund funded at only 27%, more money going out than coming in. I walked into a situation where they were giving out free health care to employees. We reformed our pension system, fully funded our ARC, renegotiated 9 labor agreements that now have defined contribution plans for all new hires, and as a result of the pension and spending reforms that we took, Trumbull's credit rating was upgraded. We need leaders that are going to have the courage to do what needs to be done to fix the state.
All right, thank you. George and Vinny, as I said, one of our candidates just has 5 seconds left. Can you ask the panel a yes or no question to take us to break?
Sure. Here's a question. University of Connecticut Athletics. State has invested billions of dollars over the years in UConn athletics. It's one of the real sources of pride, I think, for many people in the state, all over the state. Over the last few years, since the school was out of the Big East, it's now an American Athletic Conference. It's no longer in one of the Power 5 basketball or football conferences. If you were governor, what would you do about UConn athletics? Would you try to get the school into a different conference, or would you keep it the same and put that money into science research or anything else?
And this has got to be very quick, Mr. Loretti.
I'll tell you what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't renew a coach's contract for $5 million and then fire him 6 months later and pay him off. That's what I wouldn't do.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to take this question? Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Herbst.
We're going to find a new president of UConn if I'm elected governor. That I can promise you.
Anybody else? All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. You've been terrific. We're going to take a 10-minute break. All right, are we ready to go, gentlemen? Are you ready? Everybody's ready?
And we also may start asking some specific questions to the candidates. If you guys want to respond to anything that the candidates say, that's where you can raise it and you can talk. You don't have to go and answer every question.
All right, timers ready?
Okay.
Here we go. Thank you very much. George, take it.
And so the first specific question, the topic is sexual harassment and changing the culture in our society. And the first question will go to Mayor Mark Boughton. Recently, the legislature called for a review of all sexual harassment policies and procedures, and the governor did the same for all state agencies. A recent News 8 investigation found there have been only 2 sexual harassment complaints filed at the state capitol since the turn of the century, 0 since 2003. Mayor Boughton, the question is, there have been in that time period more complaints filed against you and your administration. How did you handle those allegations, and what did you learn from them that you will bring in to your job if you're elected?
Well, first of all, I applaud the Senate Democrats for at least raising the issue, and there's been discussion. I think the Republicans should have been involved as well, so it wasn't just a one-party thing. I think all of us benefit from an elevated discussion about a very serious issue. And by the way, that women have worked very hard to elevate it to begin a much larger public discussion. As I've mentioned many times before, the city of Danbury has a zero tolerance policy as it relates to any issue of harassment. If an employee comes in and files a complaint of harassment, that triggers an investigation by one of our attorneys, who then begins interviewing the relative parties depending on the nature of the issue at hand, and then makes a recommendation to me. Then, as the chief administrator of the city, it's my decision. The buck stops at my desk as to what the next step should be in terms of discipline, termination, etc. But we do have a zero tolerance policy. So I fired people that have violated that policy. And from time to time, the city of Danbury has been sued for things like unlawful termination. And I have to tell you, as mayor, I will fire somebody again tomorrow if they do the same thing. As governor, I will fire somebody if they don't follow our policies as promulgated by the legislature and of the executive branch. At the end of the day, we need to have this broad discussion about how women are treated in the workplace and at home and in other areas. And I think this begins, again, a much broader discussion about what we ought to be doing as leaders within our community and within the state. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Next question, Vinny.
Attorney Lumaj, at the last debate and in several interviews, you've made some comments about career politicians. I was wondering if you'd want to follow up on those comments and have some of our career politicians respond to that, especially because many would probably think, while I appreciate this sentiment, a career politician would be necessary succeeding Dan Malloy. So I'd want to give the floor to you on that and then get to the career politician on the end.
I think we'll start with this. Let me see which ones of them will accept the fact that they are career politicians. Which one of you would identify yourselves that you are career politicians according to the host? None, so I have nothing to say.
Not so quick. Not so quick.
27 years is a career, I would imagine.
It's over a quarter of a century in the same job. But I've got to tell you that in another life, I owned and operated my own business in the state of Connecticut for 21 years, 15 years of which I was the mayor who owned the business. So, what does that make me? Pretty productive, I think. And you know, when people say, thank you. You know, when you look at our tax rate, you'll agree that I've been very productive. You know, when you look at the fact that people say to me, well, no term limits in Shelton, huh? I said, oh yes, there are term limits. Every 2 years I have to stand for election. I have my job approval rating either rejected or accepted every 2 years. I've won 14 elections. If that makes me a career politician, many of you would love to have me on your side because I've gotten results and I've done my job far beyond people's expectations. You know, when you don't have a tax increase for 9 years in a row, I'm not sure if there's anybody on either side of the aisle that can take that distinction. I'm a career politician.
Thank you very much. George, next question.
This one is to Representative Srinivasan. You voted originally for the gun reform bills when they first came up post the Newtown tragedy. You had recently said, it's been reported, that you would not have the same vote this time around, or if it came up again. Can you explain what changed your mind and what maybe you didn't know at that time that would change it this time around?
Thank you, George. Thank you very much. Let's go back to that bill. 3 parts of that bill that we worked so hard on. Number 1, gun control. No question about that at all. And after that bill was passed, as you know, in Connecticut, is just behind California in terms of the strictest gun laws in the entire nation. So that was a part of that bill, a big part of the bill, no question about that at all. But along with that part, were 2 important things which we've already talked about prior to the little break that we had. And we all expressed public safety, we talked about school security, and we talked about mental health. Those were 2 parts that were in that bill. So the bill came to us together in a 3-part piece. You couldn't tease it apart, you couldn't separate that, and you passed it all together. The reason I'm so upset today, as I have been for some time, is that the 2 other parts never got funded. A, school security never happened at all. And number 2, mental health, there's no funding at all. So we passed a bill we did not implement. And for me, it is critical that you have to walk your talk. And we did not do that. We just saw the report not too long ago where of the schools that have the security, only less than 50% in our state have the security in their schools. And this legislature, this current legislature, is thinking of doing a task force on implementation of school security. A task force when your child and my child, my grandchild, gets up on that bus and goes every day, and the child is not secure because you're going to do a task force. The task force will come with a huge amount of paperwork. That is what was wrong. That we passed a bill, and unfortunately, the 2 important elements, along with the first one, were never got implemented. That is why I am livid on the fact that the legislature did not live up to the promise of that bill.
Vinny, next question.
And actually, I'd like to say, if anybody else would like, we had gun questions at the very beginning. Would anybody else like to add as to what they would do with the laws here in the state if they were elected governor? Okay.
Next question, Vinny.
Mr. Walker, question for you. Many believe that legalizing marijuana is this important new revenue stream, something we can sink our teeth into in Connecticut, not really viewing it as a potential gateway drug to the opioid crisis that has Connecticut in its clutches. Where do you stand on the issue of legalizing marijuana?
Well, first, Democrats want more money more money, more money. And that's the number one thing I hear when people talk about legalizing marijuana for recreational use. It would raise more money. The simple fact of the matter is there are studies that have recently been done, including for Colorado, to say that when you fully consider all the costs associated, it actually may lose money. You can't just look at the revenue side, you have to look at the expense side. I support medical marijuana, but I do not support recreational marijuana at this time for several reasons. Number one, we can debate whether it's a gateway drug or not. But secondly, we do know that we do not have, at the present point in time, a way to detect whether or not you're driving under the influence of marijuana on the scene. And I think it's important that we be able to do that for public safety reasons. Secondly, physicians, and Prasad will tell you, say that the brain does not quit developing until you're about 25 years of age. So even if you were going to think about legalizing it, once we ended up having that detection mechanism, you may not want to legalize it till 25. So my view is public health and safety comes before money, but the fact is this actually may end up costing us money rather than saving money.
Anybody else want to take the marijuana question? Go ahead, Mike.
So the response is correct. Anyone that suggests that we can actually solve our fiscal crisis by generating revenue off the sale of marijuana is totally unprepared to address the actual underlying problems that we truly face as a state. It's such a small component of what our $100 billion long-term fiscal crisis really looks like. But let's put that aside for a second. And I do agree. I generally support that which increases a child's IQ versus that which depresses a child's IQ. But put that aside for just a second. You asked a question about a gateway drug, and let's not debate the gateway drug, but let's talk about the real crisis in our state, in our youth and our adult population, and that is the opioid crisis. 25 years on an ambulance. Narcan is not a new drug. I've worked as an EMT in New York, Atlanta, New Jersey, and here in Connecticut for 18 years. Narcan has been used for decades. It is not a wonder drug. We've got to start addressing this issue. This is going to be like cancer. You look to your left, you look to your right. You're going to know somebody who's deeply affected by this crisis. I was recently at a university campus talking to college juniors, and they asked me the question about marijuana, and they all had big smiles on their face when they asked the question. I turned it around and I asked the question to the class. How many people in the class, how many are aware of somebody that they know is deeply affected by the opioid crisis? Half the class raised their hand, which prompted the professor to ask, is there any chance you all know the same student? They don't. The reality is this is affecting everybody in every socioeconomic class in our country. It's affecting every town and community. We are losing more people in 1 year to the opioid crisis than we did in the entire Vietnam War, and that's American lives lost. This is an epidemic today. How do we fix it? We've got to deal with a couple key issues. Number one, we've got to hold manufacturers of pharmaceuticals and doctors and pharmacists accountable. We should not be prescribing months of medication for patients. There are certain people that have acute pain, and they've got to go to specialists that have additional training. But the reality is, in this class that I was talking to, one person had their arm in a sling, rotator cuff surgery. Guess what's in the medicine cabinet? 90 Percocet. We are not fixing this. The loopholes in our legislation is huge. Up to 7 days, no more than a 7-day supply, unless a doctor deems it medically necessary. That is not acceptable. You should have no more than 2 to 5 days worth of medication dispensed at any one time, period. Number two, doctors have to be educated and trained and then held accountable. 3, we've got to work throughout our communities to remove the stigma associated with abuse and addiction. This can no longer be a place where we suffer in silence. If we do not fix this, it will affect all of us. This is a far more important topic than the legalization of marijuana.
Thank you very much. Anybody else want to address this marijuana opioid?
I'm just curious what the debate rules are. Mr. Handler used the word doctor, so do I qualify? I'm not sure to whether the 30-second rebuttal. I know, I'm just kidding. This is a very serious issue. We talked about, it seems, this evening is about public safety. And that's my concern when it comes to recreational marijuana. We do not know. We have no way of measuring impairment. So there you are driving under the influence of marijuana, no idea at all, and you can just imagine law enforcement, how impossible it is going to be for them to figure out, are you under the influence of marijuana? So public safety is a criteria that I'm very concerned about. And number two, of course, public health. How is it going to impact the developing brain over years and years and years of use of recreational marijuana? If you look where we are with Alzheimer's, we know very little, hardly anything at all. And now you're going to add on a drug which 20 years down the line, 30 years down the line, the societal implications is unimaginable. You know, the Office of Fiscal Management, they gave us an estimate of about $110 to $120 million. That's the revenue source we're going to get. It's no big billion-dollar revenue you're going to get with recreational marijuana. So here you have $110 to $120 million in your bank account. But look at the societal implications, public health, public safety. That's my concern with recreational marijuana.
Thank you. Next question, gentlemen.
All right, just really quick, just to be clear, and for everyone here to be clear and everybody watching to be clear, so none of you gentlemen, if elected, will entertain the notion of legalizing marijuana to generate revenue in Connecticut. A year from now, none of you are going to change your minds on this. I just want to confirm that. You're all opposed.
The first debate, I was clear in saying that I felt a decision of such consequence should be put before the voters of the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, and I not until those two criteria are met, but I support this as an initiative at the appropriate point in time.
And likewise, I think working with the legislature at a time, I'm an evidence-based person. I agree with many of the sentiments. My life has been touched with family members on the opioid side. It's very personal, but I also think that we have to look at where the world's evolving and do it in careful ways, and it really is up to the voters what path they want to be the culture of Connecticut.
And we can ask one quick question while we're on that topic. Talking to supporters of legalizing marijuana, they say that in Colorado that the number of opioid overdoses has actually decreased because they can now use marijuana for pain, chronic pain, instead of opioids. Would you, in Connecticut, when we passed the medical marijuana law, we were one of the first, but right now it's actually kind of well behind where many other states are, according to many of the supporters. Would you support allowing chronic pain to be one of the criteria that would allow people to obtain medical marijuana? Mr. Boughton.
I really think that strikes at the heart of the whole issue and reason why we have medical marijuana. And if a doctor prescribes that for a chronic pain condition, be it a neck, back, whatever, that's certainly between the patient and their doctor as to the best way to treat it. But I also want to just add that doing stuff for money, just because it'll get you money, is never a good way to create good public policy. It's just not a good way to do it.
All right, let's go to the next topic, George, or Vinny, either one of you.
Mr. Obsitnik, you have an IT background, how I understand it. Cybersecurity is, if you talk to people in Washington, is maybe the greatest threat over the next generation to our country, at least from foreign powers. In the state of Connecticut, we do have a cybersecurity czar. We have somebody who's in charge of the state's cybersecurity. It's under PURA, but there is no budget and there is no staff. People will say that Connecticut has one of the better programs, by the way, as well, because they actually have somebody. Considering how important this may be, whether it be our critical infrastructure like electricity, whether it be our businesses, whether it be our own private information, what type of priority would cybersecurity be in your administration?
No, it's a great question. It's primarily an example that the fixed costs that we live under, these pension obligations, rising debt, healthcare costs, are crowding out other priorities to protect our infrastructure. And that's, I think, what we're seeing there. And cybersecurity is an unknown threat that I've worked with in the past that is underfunded by the state of Connecticut, and it worries me. I think we also have to look at, is cybersecurity an opportunity for Connecticut? Okay? I was involved with starting a business called Siri on your iPhone. I apologize if you don't like how she speaks to you. But here's something you all probably don't know. Do you realize that Yale University was involved in the creation of Siri? They were. Can you imagine the ecosystem we'd have in New Haven if we were able to benefit by being in the Silicon Valley, in Menlo Park, with applied research universities, with investors, with developers, and everything else? Can you imagine what New Haven would be like if all of that was around Yale and Siri? What would we be talking about today? We'd be talking about a vibrant ecosystem. And I think we have to look at things like cybersecurity and other capabilities that we have and say, how are we going to compete with the outside world? And the biggest clue I believe we can take a page from is what Mayor Bloomberg did in New York in the creation of Roosevelt Island. He said, you know what? New York is having problems creating a new economy. He asked what applied research universities want to come to Manhattan. He said, Cornell came from the rural areas, Technion came from Israel. Google, Facebook, and Uber started to work with these companies. In 6 years, they built 2.2 million square feet of newly developed land. Hospital, residential, retail, living. The millennials flock there. Now you have restaurants and arts. And I hope that our Economic Stability and Competitiveness Council will take up that one cause, because I think we have the ability to create 3 Roosevelt Islands. One around healthcare and life sciences, one around advanced manufacturing, and one around finance and insurance. And we can use our 42 colleges, attract other universities here, community colleges here, to create a supply chain of workers to then go work for our businesses. Because we've lost 2 Fortune 500 companies, but do you realize we still have 17? And what this next governor has to do is hug those 17 customers, because that's what you do when you're having problems in business. You hug the customers that you have. And that's where this all starts. It starts solving the problem here. That's how we turn this around, by training our people to basically compete in a new economy which retains businesses here, grows wages and economy. And my 5-step plan that I'll be rolling out, remember I said Connecticut's created 5,000 jobs, 5,800 jobs over 30 years? I believe around this Roosevelt Island approach that we can create 300,000 jobs over the next 8 years. But if you've never built a business, if you've never rolled up your hands, bent metal to build a product, or coded something, you don't know what it means like to attract businesses to keep them here. And that's what I'm focused on doing. Thank you.
All right, Vinny and George, we're going to move to closing by about 8:30. So one more question, then we need time, 2 minutes for each of the gentlemen to wrap up this evening. So figure out what your question needs to be. Make it a good one.
Well, I've got the question from right here, the Ronald Reagan Club at Notre Dame High School, who was actually president when I came here, which is very depressing. And their question is, with the sanctuary city situation in Connecticut, across the country, but in Connecticut, as governor, would you allow it to continue? And if not, how would you plan on ending these cities in our state?
Let's each one of you answer this question.
Well, I'll take that.
Starting with Mr. Herbst.
Don't worry. You get to, I'll be quick.
Mayweather McGregor.
Okay. If I am elected governor of the state of Connecticut, we are going to enforce federal law. We are going to enforce federal law. And you know what? Can you imagine if myself, Mayor Boughton, or Mayor Loretti told the governor of the state of Connecticut that we weren't going to enforce a state law? What do you think he would do to us? He'd take us to court. This is no different. We're going to enforce federal law. I've spoken to law enforcement, many of whom are here tonight, many of whom are supporting me. Sanctuary cities present dangers to those that live in them and to the state of Connecticut. If you talk to law enforcement like I have, they will tell you that sanctuary cities have helped to facilitate this opioid epidemic because of different standards applied based upon that status. Here's the thing I take issue with Mayor Bronin of Hartford, who's running for governor, besides the fact that he wants all of us to bail him out. Besides that fact, here's the issue I take. He went on Tucker Carlson to talk about his city having sanctuary city status. And Tucker Carlson very rightfully asked him this question. Did you ever consult with your chief of police or the Hartford Police Department to determine the number of violent crimes that were committed by those that were in your city illegally. And he couldn't answer the question. You know what, folks? Sanctuary cities are not a political decision. That's something that you rely upon law enforcement. You trust law enforcement. You listen to them. The first question I would ask the colonel of the Connecticut State Police if I'm governor, how many violent crimes are committed by those that are here illegally? We want people to come to our country legally. We are a country of immigrants. But we do not want people coming to our country that are going to commit crimes that hurt people, that steal from people, and that long-term compromise the public health, safety, and welfare of the people of the state of Connecticut. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to enforce federal law. We're going to stop decimating law enforcement like this governor has done over the course of the last 8 years. If you look at what he has done to the Connecticut State Police, when I am elected governor, the Connecticut State Police will have no greater advocate. We're going to stop punishing law-abiding citizens in the state of Connecticut, and we're going to start punishing criminals. If I'm elected governor, I will work with the legislature to repeal and replace Governor Malloy's early prisoner release program. If I am elected governor, I am going to follow what 63% of the people of the state of Connecticut said they believe should be a law of the land, and I will work with the legislature to reinstitute the death penalty in the state of Connecticut.
But Tim, if I could interject, if you've got a church situation, they've sought sanctuary, they're in the church, they got people around the church, Dick Blumenthal's there, he doesn't want to play, how do you end that situation?
The state of Connecticut,
Melissa's with them. Come on.
all right, the state of Connecticut has laws that affect the state. The federal government has laws that affect the entire nation. You cannot tell the United States Attorney General and the federal government that you are not going to follow federal law. We are a country of laws. And I think a lot of what the governor does on this subject matter is political grandstanding. And quite frankly, on this issue, we enforce federal law, and we do not politically grandstand. We listen to law enforcement. We support them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll take
Mr.
that.
Lumaj.
I'll take it. Look, I personally and my family and I did benefit from the immigration laws of this nation. We came to the United States as refugees. I followed the law. I became an American citizen. I came here with the intent of being an American. I didn't come here with the intent of trying to turn Americans into whatever. I came from Albania, turn them into Albanians. So with regard to illegal immigration, the greatest concern that I have with regard to sanctuary cities is this, that we are rewarding and enticing people who are illegal to move into our state. It pays to be illegal in our state. You get a driver's license, you get sanctuary cities, you get in-state tuition, and the governor just argued on their behalf that they should get financial aid. Now, if my nephew or nieces who live in New York decided to cross the border, and let's not misunderstand that term because I crossed the border too, but I'm talking about the other borders, the state borders. But if they decided to come up north and attend one of our higher institutions, they will not qualify for in-state tuition. They would have to pay out-of-state tuition. So we're penalizing American citizens whose parents are working hard and paying taxes and rewarding illegals. I, for one, would make sure that the federal law is going to be enforced. I would cut funding to any city that does not enforce federal law or doesn't cooperate with ICE. That is a security matter. That is something that affects you and I and our families every single day. We have to stop enticing and encouraging people to move into our state if they are illegal. Illegal means illegal. You shouldn't be here. That's the way it is. Not only that you shouldn't be here, but in addition to that, who told them they should be rewarded for being here? So we have our priorities wrong. Let's put our citizens first. Let's put America first. We are Americans. Let's take care of each other first, and then we'll think about the others.
Thank you very much. Mr. Obsitnik.
I'm a first-generation American on my father's side. My grandfather brought my dad and his my grandmother here in 1938, 6 months before Hitler went through Czechoslovakia. And my life would have been very different if he wouldn't have come. He went into Heasley Mine No. 3, the coal mines of western Pennsylvania. I never met the man because he died of black lung disease. But he followed a system and a process to get my dad here and my mom here. And I think when we talk about career politicians back then in Washington, they have a job to do to basically bring more certainty into our immigration policies and how we as a culture and a society live in today's world. I'm a military veteran also. I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States twice in my life. So yes, I'm a rule follower. I enforce laws, and I think as your governor, that's what I would do as well. Similar to the other gentleman, work tightly with the federal government to ensure our laws are enacted, because a governor does three things: keep people safe, the citizens safe. Number two, take care of people who really can't take care of themselves, who are citizens. And number three, keep as much money in everyone else's pocket so you all can go out and do what you need to do in your life. If it's retire, build a business, send your kid to college, have a bar mitzvah, right? Those are the three things government need to do. The first thing is keep you all safe, and as your next governor, that's what I'll focus on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Srinivasan.
Public safety. We have talked about this evening. And when I think of sanctuary cities, I say there is a process. Rightfully so. This is a nation of immigrants. You immigrated many generations ago. My wife and I are first-generation immigrants into this country. I arrived in '75 with $7.50 in my pocket, legally through a process. And here I stand before you, requesting you to consider me for the highest position in our state. So there is a process. So that's the process everybody needs to follow. And I still remember vividly when I finished my medical school and I was waiting and waiting. In those days, everything came by snail mail, waiting for that letter to say, you know what? You can go to the United States legally. And so for me, federal law is what all of us need to follow. No question about that at all. And that is why sanctuary cities is something that I will never be able to tolerate or accept. Legal laws. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Walker.
I have taken an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States 5 times. When I'm your next governor, I will take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Connecticut. I also believe in the rule of law. Under the Constitution of the United States, it is very clear that the federal government has responsibility for immigration policy. Do we need immigration reform? Yes. To separate a pathway from citizenship from a pathway from legal status to change our system. But under rule of law, you're either legal or you're illegal. If you're undocumented and you can't find your passport or your green card, we'll help you. But there's a difference between being legal or illegal. You also need to understand that 35% of the revenues that this state gets is from the federal government. You want to bite the hand that feeds you? I don't think so. We need to honor the Constitution and the rule of law.
Thank you very much. Mr. Boughton.
I have, I think, a unique perspective on this issue. Danbury is probably the most diverse city in Connecticut and one of the most diverse cities in the United States of America. And about 8 or 9 years ago, we enrolled in a program in the Bush administration called 287G. 287G meant that 2 of our police officers, detectives, would be trained as immigration agents. They went to Quantico, they received all the training, they were able to access databases and be able to arrest the criminals in our community that were hiding out. Now I got to tell you something. This freaked our city out. And I had 8,000 people standing outside City Hall who did not want us to enroll in the program. And I spent a lot of time going to the churches and going to the various institutions and talking to the pastors and saying, look, we're here to work closely with ICE to be able to find those people that are exploiting you and everybody else in your community. And we were able to utilize a program that was very successful. We arrested over 20 people in the city of Danbury. We caught one guy taking flying lessons at Danbury Airport who was not here legally. And by the way, he wasn't learning how to land. We caught people that were involved in horrible child abuse issues. We caught people that had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 DWIs and had them deported. This was a good program. And the community itself liked it and understood it once we implemented it. I was the only mayor in the state of Connecticut to do that. And more recently, when the president said ICE will be coming into Connecticut looking for those criminals that will be terrorizing the community, I was the only mayor in Connecticut that said, I'll work with ICE. The Danbury Police Department will work with ICE. They are hard-working men and women that are here to follow the law. Just like everybody that said, when I put my hand on the Bible and take the oath of office, it says that I'll support and defend all of the laws of the United States of America, the state of Connecticut, and our local community. You don't get to choose which laws to support. You don't get that choice as a leader. And so I will tell you, as governor, we will not be a sanctuary state. We'll work with federal officials to make sure that people that are engaged in illegal trafficking, drug dealing, that are here to exploit the community are deported and deported as fast as possible. But I'll also work closely with those that came across the border, maybe because of no reason of their own, that were just infants, to try to figure out with the federal government a way that they can stay here. But I've always believed that if you've come to this country illegally, you should never have the right of citizenship. Citizenship is the greatest honor that we can bestow upon anybody. And if you want to be a citizen, you're going to have to go back to your host country, come back in the legal way, and take the appropriate steps. But I think there's a common ground that we can find that will allow those people to stay here under some kind of new system that won't require necessarily going back to their country. But citizenship is a different story. So in summation, I'm proud to work with Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement. I'm proud to work with citizenship services to be able to get people to become U.S. citizens, and we do that every day. In fact, at our library in April, we're going to be having a swearing-in ceremony for new citizens. This is the greatest country in the world. We ought to be encouraging people to accept the mantle of citizenship.
Thank you. Mr. Handler.
So I support strong borders, but I also support a path to legal citizenship. We have to define what the actual issue is that we're dealing with. And there isn't a person in this room, I suspect, that is opposed to taking somebody that's here without legal status, that commits a violent crime, and putting them on the very first plane out of here. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that have been here for decades, that have been working an honest day's work for an honest living, paying taxes, caring for their family, that now we're talking about separating them from their family to send them home, when the only crime they've committed is they're not here legally. We've got to provide a path to legal citizenship. If you spent time talking to law enforcement or working with law enforcement, you would know one thing in our cities. Having an environment where people that are here without legal status, that are afraid to report crimes that are committed against them or crimes they've witnessed, puts all of us in danger. Something that we've got to take very seriously. Let's talk about two things when it comes to people coming in and out of our state. We know why they're leaving, right? We know they're leaving because the cost of living is rising, their wages are flat, and we're taxing them out of existence. Why are they coming? So we talk about the tens of thousands of people that leave our state every year. But that's a net number. We've got a lot of people coming into our state because we are one of the most generous welfare states in the country. And here's the issue. I'm not opposed to giving a hand up, but we cannot have generational welfare where you're giving more than a hand up for you, your kids, and their next grandkids. That's why people are coming here at the rate they're coming. We should be open, but we should be fair to those that are here legally first. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Loretti.
Does anybody remember Tim's answer? Okay, for the sake of brevity, 80% of what he said. But what he didn't say is that we all agree that the United States of America is a country of laws. And we can't selectively pick and choose which laws we're going to enforce and which laws we're not going to enforce. There's an administration in Washington that doesn't agree with sanctuary cities, and they don't agree with marijuana. So at the end of the day, we can expect a lot of enforcement in that regard. And when you selectively pick and choose what you're going to enforce and what you're not going to enforce, it sends a mixed message to people. And it's no way to run a society, a state, or a country.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the final question. Now we have 2 minutes for you folks to wrap this up.
If we have time left, does that count towards our closing
Yes,
statement?
if you want to take that, you can.
Yeah, I have time left too.
Well, you know what?
Oh, yeah, it should.
You're right. That was the last question. So
The chairman says it's going to be
8:30.
2 minutes each.
Yeah. All right, so 2 minutes each. And Mr. Loretti, we start with you.
Well, it was a pleasure and an honor to be here tonight to exchange our points of view about who we are and what we stand for. I'm proud to tell you that I think that Connecticut is a great state, and we all have a vested interest here. And this is really about who can get elected in a very blue state, who is consistent and predictable, and can get the electorate of this state to buy into their policies that we need to change. If you look at the history of my tenure as mayor in the city of Shelton, there's nobody more consistent and predictable in terms of being able to grow an economy, allow people to live in a place that is affordable under their ability to pay, to grow a tax base that provides stability within an area and reinvent itself. Connecticut needs to change. We need to reinvent the way we do things. And you do that through employment and creating opportunities for people. I've done that effectively, consistently for 26 years. And I represent a city that is extremely different today than when it was 26 years ago. The old blue-collar manufacturing place in the valley. You know, not any undifferent than most places in Connecticut, where once upon a time we made everything in the world in this great state. And so when that changes, you have to change. I've demonstrated that change. I've demonstrated the formula for success that the state could model after. Thank you, and I look forward to your support.
Thank you so much. Mr. Handler.
Thank you. Thanks to our moderators for tonight's event. Thank you all for coming and being an engaged audience. And most importantly, thank you to my loving wife, Sarah, who's home taking care of our daughters. I want to talk to you about a couple things with respect to where we stand as a state today. We've got great opportunity. There's also a lot of anger, if you haven't noticed, from a lot of people on stage and a lot of people in the audience. In the last 6 months, I've noticed two types of angry people. There's different degrees of anger in this world. The first is the Connecticut resident that loves Connecticut and does not want to be forced to leave Connecticut to move to Florida. And they're angry about having to make that decision right now. They are angry. There's another group of angry people in this state. That's the group that loves Connecticut, doesn't want to leave to move to Florida, but they've already made the emotional detachment from the state and they are going to move to Florida, but for the fact that they can no longer sell their home. They are really angry. Here's the reality. Did I hit too close to home? Here's the reality. We can do great things again in our state, but we've got to fix our $100 billion financial problems. We can do great things in our state. I have the confidence to say that because I've just spent the last 6 years cleaning up the very same mess in the city of Stamford. The exact same mess created by the exact same team that's up in Hartford today. I have cleaned up after Dan Malloy in Stamford, and I will do it again as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Handler. Mr. Boughton.
Well, I want to thank our moderators for your help tonight. We appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mayor Mark Boughton from the city of Danbury, and I'm running for governor. And I'd like your support. And let me just tell you quickly that in Danbury, we've been proud to bring some of the best metrics of the state of Connecticut. I've already talked about the fact that we have the lowest unemployment rate. I've talked about the fact that we are the safest city in Connecticut. I've mentioned that we have some of the lowest effective property tax rates, and I must have told you that we have the lowest sewer and water rates in the state of Connecticut. But there's two other things that I'm really proud of about our city. One is just 3 weeks ago we were named as the best and the most livable city in Connecticut. And two, about 4 months ago we were named as the best place to start a new business in Connecticut. Now that doesn't happen because I'm working alone. It happens because we put a good team around us. I won 9 straight elections as a Republican in a Democratic city. But most importantly, I brought in with me 14 and 15 council people for a supermajority in our city council since I've been in office. If we're going to lead this state, we've got to run as a team. We've got to work as a team. And we've got to get all of our folks in. It's not just about me, and it's not about any of them up here. At the end of the day, this election, it's about your neighborhood, your community, and of course, it's about our state. I'm proud of the job I've done in Danbury, and I certainly want to replicate that here in the state of Connecticut. And quickly, a while ago, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. I had 4 doctors tell me there was no way that you're going to be able to survive this. I went and got the best help possible, and I stand here today stronger than ever. Our state is on the operating table too, and it's going to take the best people with the best ideas and the whole team working together to make sure we bring the Connecticut comeback. Join us. Go to Boughton2018.com and be part of this state's comeback. God bless you and God bless America.
Thank you, Mr. Boughton. Mr. Walker.
Thank you. As a practicing Roman Catholic, I feel right at home here at Notre Dame, and thank you for the question from the Reagan group. I am a Reagan presidential appointee, a Bush presidential appointee, and a Clinton presidential appointee. Connecticut has gone from a top 5 state to a bottom 5 state in the last 30 years. The 2018 election is the most important election in the history of this state. We will decide whether we will continue to follow the same failed path that's taken us from top 5 to bottom 5, or whether we elect a governor and a Connecticut turnaround team that will tell the truth, make tough choices, and create a better future for all of us. I am the only person, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, who's made government smaller, more economical, more efficient, more effective, more respected, and increased return to taxpayers. We hear a lot of numbers thrown out. The fact is, Connecticut is a tax and spend state. Look at the financial statements of the cities that are represented here and find out what their tax record is and what their spending record is, and it might be a little bit different than what you're being told. But let me say this. The fact is, I'm not running for me. I'm running for you. I'm running so all of you can live here as long as you want, so that your kids can get a good job here, so they can be near you, so you can live near your grandkids, which are God's gift to humanity, and so that all of us can retire here if we want without losing our home equity value and without being taxed out of our home. We can do it. If I'm your governor, we will do it. Thank you for your help.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Mr. Srinivasan.
In November, we need to bring victory to our party. We need to turn the state red. The House, the Senate, all the constitutional offices, and of course, the executive office as well. And to do that, I need your help. And as we heard earlier on in the beginning of the program, it cannot be done by a person. It cannot be done by a team. It has to be done by all of us because so much is at stake. We need to make sure as a party that at the top of the ticket and all the way down, we choose winners and not losers on the ticket. We have to put behind the ghosts of 2010 and 2014 and move forward in 2018. And for that, we definitely need your help. Just look at some statistics we have to deal with. 2.2 million people have the capacity to go to the polls. Of that, 800,000 are Democrats. 900,000 are independents. So we need, as a party, to have the message, the messenger that's going to resonate with all of us, our base, our home. But along with that, we need to address, convince the people of Connecticut, our electorate, that we are the party that's going to revive Connecticut and make it prosperous again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Obsitnik.
when you find yourself under a 10,000-ton Russian submarine and they have no idea that you're monitoring them, you understand in life there are more important things than self-interest. And for 30 years, politicians in Hartford have been taking us down a road to ruin, caring more about their self-interest than you all. What I learned in the military was about the mission. And for those of you veterans and people in fire and police departments as well, you understand that to accomplish the mission, it takes perseverance, grit, fight, teamwork, discipline. That's how I was trained to look at big challenges, and that's what I will bring to the office of governor of this great state. My submarine captain, when I went up the first night to the North Pole, he basically said, Steve, leaders do one thing. He said, leaders set tone, tone creates a culture, and your culture is your destiny. Leaders set tone, tone creates a culture, culture is your destiny. Well, we have a leader right now who is a chief tax collector. And that chief tax collector has created a culture which are driving seniors to Florida, businesses to South Carolina, and our most precious resource, our kids, to another state where there's more opportunity. So I will be the Chief Economic Development Officer that restores fiscal stability to our state so you can afford to live here, to build a family here, and to retire with dignity in Connecticut. And along the way, we will create a Connecticut jobs engine to turn the moving vans around. That's what I promise to you, and I ask for your support for governor in this great race. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lumaj.
Thank you. Challenges have been part of my life even before I was born. I was born in Albania, a communist country. My family was considered to be an anti-communist family. Therefore, I was born in slavery. I was 20 years old when I escaped slavery. The government controlled my life and my family's life. I overcame that challenge. Escaped Albania, went to a refugee camp in Yugoslavia. I was kept there for 9 months. I escaped, I overcame that challenge too. Came to the United States, didn't have any money, didn't speak a word of English. A church took me in, me and my brothers, and we overcame that challenge too. I went to college. After college, I investigated white-collar crimes in New York City, and after I got married, I became an attorney. I am the American dream. Only in America can people achieve what we achieve here. Only in America can someone, a refugee from Albania, come in front of you and ask you to interview me for the most powerful position in the state. Those challenges have given me the character and the fortitude, the background and the backbone to go to Hartford and change that culture and dismantle that place and that mentality that is holding you and I back. What I bring to the table is this. I'll bring the Trump voters to the table. They're going to vote for me. The inner cities, which I've spent the last 4 years forging relations with them, are going to support me. I'll get the number of votes that I need there. The Eastern European community, which is the fastest growing demographic in our state and in our cities, I have a great relationship with them. I'll bring them to the table. If I get your support, with my fortitude and my determination to fight for you and only for the voters and put the state first and America first, we can save the state. So please join me at peterlumaj.com. God bless you and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Mr. Lumaj. Mr. Herbst.
Thank you, Ann. At the beginning of this debate, you heard me talk about the need to elect leaders who are focused on the next generation and to stop electing and sending politicians to Hartford that are simply focused on the next election. And perhaps I talk often about the next generation because as the youngest person in the race, I wonder if 30 years from now, when we look back on this moment and we look back on this time, will we be able to say that we turned the page and worked hard to reform our state government and make the decisions necessary to get us on the right track, to say that the reality of Connecticut, in fact, lives up to the promise of Connecticut. The most fundamental choice and the most fundamental question you have to answer as Republican primary voters comes down to one word, and that is trust. Who can you trust to carry our party's banner through the November elections to win, but more importantly, who can you trust to govern in a way that gets done what needs to be done in making the tough decisions, in making the unpopular decisions, in doing what needs to be done to fix our state? I am the only candidate in this race that has signed a lead by example pledge, refused money from Hartford lobbyists, taken on the governor's judicial activism, taken on the perks that the Hartford insiders avail themselves of for this reason. If we're going to change Hartford, I believe in my heart, it is time to send a new generation of leadership to Hartford to fix our state and make it great again. Our state is amazing. It provides tremendous opportunity. And I know that our best days are ahead of us because in this state, the grandson of a woman raised by a single immigrant mother during the Great Depression could at the age of 37 seek the state's highest office. That's the potential that Connecticut has for future generations. I ask you to join with me to guarantee that the reality of Connecticut will live up to the promise of Connecticut. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herbst. I would just like to say thank you, gentlemen, for this evening. Thank you to the two moderators.
Thank you, Ann.
And thank you to a most gracious audience. JR.
Yes, thank you very much. How about a round of applause for everyone up here, guys? So as we close in on the third debate, I want to thank all of you for your patience. This was a standing room. We actually have about 550 people in attendance tonight, which is amazing. This is a clear sign that the Connecticut Republican Party is here to fight and we're here to win. But understand this. These candidates, the candidates in these races, whether it's state senate, whether it's state house, whether it's attorney general, whether it's governor, need you. They need you to knock doors. They need you to donate time. They need you to donate money because if you don't, we don't win. So keep that in mind as the summer approaches and we need people to make phone calls and we need people to do everything we need in order to win. Do you guys want to win? All right, then I'll see you all on a Super Saturday to knock doors and make phone calls. Thank you very much and drive safe.
Timothy, nice to see you.
We're going to be victorious in 2018.